The stew simmered low on the fire, its scent of onions and fat drifting through the cramped kitchen while the heavy pot hissed with each bubble. Across the yard, cicadas shrieked like a living alarm. Rosa's hand trembled as she pinched the gray-white crystals between her fingers, letting them fall silent into the broth. Within minutes, the mixture that had sustained her master for nearly a decade would turn into his undoing. This was not just dinner. It was a weapon. And the girl stirring it barefoot, scarred, barely 17, knew she had no second chance. Before we go deeper into this story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Your support keeps stories like this alive. The year was 1852, deep in the piney woods of Mississippi. The Whitmore plantation sprawled across thousands of acres, its cotton fields stretching past the horizon, its wealth extracted from backs that bent under whips. Rosa had arrived here 9 years earlier, sold at the age of 8. In that time, she had learned to move without sound, to obey without question, and to endure what others ignored. But endurance has limits. The kitchen was her cage and her sanctuary both. Smoke and grease clung to the air. The walls blackened from years of fire. She could smell lard cooling in pans, hear the scrape of wooden spoons against iron pots, feel the grit of ash under her toes. It was in this furnace that Rosa planned her rebellion. For months, she had hidden away tiny scraps of knowledge, whispers about chemicals carried upriver, powders meant for rats, crystals that could fell livestock. One day she found her opening, a small pouch of cyanide crystals left carelessly by a trader who thought her invisible. She tucked it beneath the loose floorboard, praying no one saw. Now, with the master's birthday supper drawing the family together, Rosa chose her moment. Her master, Elias Whitmore, was a man whose cruelty needed no witnesses. At the table, he wore refinement, pressed waistcoat, gold watch chain, voice smooth as bourbon. Behind closed doors, he wielded fists and fear. Neighbors turned away from the bruises on the faces of those he owned. Guests ignored the muffled cries drifting from the quarters. What would you do if silence meant survival? Rosa stirred the pot with steady rhythm, her mind racing. She thought of the night, 3 years earlier, when he dragged her from her bed. She thought of the children born in the quarters with his eyes, his temper. She thought of the whip coiled above the fireplace like a trophy. Each memory was another crystal falling into the stew. The household bustled beyond the kitchen walls, boots clattering on wood, laughter echoing down the hall. Ruth, the older cook who had raised Rosa like a daughter, paused by the fire. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of Rosa's pale face. "Girl, you sick?" she whispered. Rosa shook her head, pressing a finger to her lips. Ruth's breath caught. Then, after a long pause, she turned away. She neither helped nor stopped her. Some horrors were too long endured. By dusk, the table gleamed with silver and glass. Guests arrived from neighboring plantations, bringing wives in silk and men with tobacco-stained teeth. Servants moved like shadows, setting platters, pouring wine. Rosa carried the steaming pot of stew to the table, its aroma filling the air with savory promise. Elias clapped his hands for silence, raising his goblet. "To another year of prosperity," he declared, voice booming. As the first bowls were ladled, Rosa lingered in the doorway, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might give her away. The spoon dipped, lifted, served. Conversation rose and fell like waves. Elias laughed, the sound sharp as a whip crack. And then a cough, a spasm, a goblet shattering against the table. The guests froze as Elias's face contorted, his hands clawing at his throat. His wife gasped, her pearls rattling against her breastbone. Another cough erupted from down the table. Silverware clattered to the floor. The savory aroma of stew turned suddenly sour in Rosa's nose, as though the kitchen smoke had followed her into the room. Panic spread like fire through dry grass. Servants rushed forward, only to be shoved back. Wives screamed. Men shouted for water, for brandy, for a doctor. Rosa pressed herself into the shadows, her body trembling with terror and triumph both. The room was chaos now. Boots scraping on wood, glass shattering underfoot, the metallic tang of vomit mingling with candle wax. One by one, the voices faltered, gasps breaking into silence. Elias collapsed forward, face sinking into the white linen. The goblets that had caught candlelight now lay overturned, their contents pooling like blood across the tablecloth. Rosa's secret burned in the air, invisible yet undeniable. She had turned the master's feast into his funeral. But as the last cries echoed through the hall, Rosa realized something chilling. The poison spared no one. The children, the neighbors, even Ruth, who had tasted a spoonful before serving, was clutching her stomach in the kitchen. Rosa's plan had not ended one man. It had unleashed a storm across the entire plantation. The night was only beginning. The house had fallen into a hush, broken only by the scrape of chairs and the shallow rasp of breath from those not yet gone. Candles guttered low, their smoke curling like fingers across the rafters. Outside, hounds barked in the distance, their baying slicing through the still Mississippi night. The feast had become a graveyard, and Rosa stood in its center, trembling. One girl's act had shifted the weight of an entire world. The stakes were no longer survival alone, they were exposure, retribution, and the wrath of every neighboring planter who would demand blood for blood. Rosa slipped back toward the kitchen, her bare feet sticky with spilled stew. Ruth was there, bent over, sweat streaming down her wrinkled brow. She lifted her eyes, dull with pain, and managed a hoarse whisper. "Run!" The word cut through Rosa's panic. Run where? Through the woods patrolled by riders? To the river, churning black under the moon? Or back to the quarters, where her every step would condemn the others? A floorboard creaked behind her. Samuel, one of the field hands barely older than Rosa, loomed in the doorway. His broad shoulders cast shadows that swallowed the walls. He glanced at Ruth, then at Rosa, then the pot still steaming on the fire. "What did you do?" he hissed. Rosa's throat tightened. She could not form the words. Samuel's jaw clenched, but instead of raising alarm, he crossed the room in 2 strides, seized the pot, and flung it into the yard. The stew hissed as it struck the earth, smoke curling upward like a funeral pyre. Then he turned back to Rosa, eyes hard. "They'll hang us all if they find out." And still, he did not shout for the overseer. Beyond the kitchen walls, the sound of retching and screaming continued. The master's guests, men who signed contracts and whipped strangers' children, were crumpling like paper dolls. Rosa clutched the edge of the counter, her nails digging into the wood. She wanted to believe Samuel's silence meant safety, but silence could be as dangerous as truth. Minutes crawled. Then the front door banged open, and voices spilled inside, overseers, riders, neighbors who had seen the commotion through the windows. Lanterns flared, boots stamped, orders flew. Rosa ducked into the shadows behind the pantry shelves. From there, she heard the barked command. "Shut the gates. Nobody leaves until we know what's been done." The net was already closing. By midnight, the house reeked of bile and sweat. Bodies were dragged into the hallway. Covered with sheets, the moans of the dying fading into silence. A doctor arrived, his buggy wheels crunching gravel outside, but his remedies were useless. "Poison," he muttered, voice grim. "Clean. Fast." His words carried weight, echoed in whispers through the house, and with those whispers came suspicion. Who could have touched the pot? Who lingered too long in the kitchen? Who had reason to hate? Every gaze drifted toward the enslaved, At the quarters, the people stirred in restless waves, voices low, children clinging to their mothers' skirts. They had seen the commotion, smelled the sour air drifting from the big house, felt the crackle of danger in the night. Some wept openly fear that the noose would come for them, whether guilty or not. Others whispered prayers, their eyes on Rosa when she returned. Rosa's heart pounded as she slipped among them. Faces turned, questions unspoken. A woman pulled her child closer, whispering, "Lord, have mercy." Another man spat into the dirt, muttering, "This brings nothing but fire." But there was also Ruth's voice, faint yet steady, carried from the kitchen on Samuel's arms. "Don't you blame her. Not her alone. Her alone." The quarters divided in silence, half seeing Rosa as a spark of justice, half as a fuse lit too soon. And all of them knew what dawn would bring: interrogation, torture, the overseer's whip tearing through flesh until someone confessed. What would you do if one girl's act threatened to damn every soul around you? As the night deepened, Rosa sat outside the cabin, the damp earth cold beneath her. She could hear the frogs in the marsh, the soft creak of pines swaying above. Each sound seemed louder than it should, as though the world itself held its breath. She thought of escape rivers, swamps, freedom whispered like a distant song. But she thought, too, of the others who might suffer if she fled. She lifted her eyes toward the stars. For the first time in years, they looked like a map. By the first light of dawn, riders would come with questions sharpened like knives. Rosa knew the moment of choice was near. She could run, she could confess, or she could vanish into the shadows of the swamp, leaving behind a trail no one could follow. The hounds were already stirring. The rooster crowed at 5:30 a.m., the sound thin and sharp in the damp Mississippi air. Dew clung to the grass like a shroud, and the Whitmore house loomed silent, its shutters closed, its halls echoing with absence. Inside, the dining table still bore the scars of the night before wax puddles from toppled candles, overturned goblets sticky with dark wine, and the lifeless forms beneath linen sheets. The county sheriff arrived just before 6. His name was Donovan, a man with a jaw like carved stone and eyes that missed nothing. The crunch of his boots on gravel announced authority before he even spoke. With him came the county coroner, Dr. Webb, a meticulous figure who carried the air of Philadelphia classrooms into the humid Delta morning. Together, they stepped across the threshold of the Whitmore plantation and into a scene of quiet horror. Sheriff Donovan stopped first in the parlor. His fingers brushed the heavy drapes, feeling the damp, the faint odor of sickness clinging to the air. "Poison," Webb said again, crouching over a corpse, his notes scribbled quick as his eyes darted. "Arsenic, more than enough to kill twice this many." He looked up, his voice low. "And this much arsenic isn't an accident." The stakes sharpened with every breath. A deliberate poisoning meant intent. Intent meant rebellion. And rebellion meant the full wrath of Mississippi law would descend on every black body still breathing within the plantation's borders. By 6:30, the questioning began. Rosa and the others were lined up in the yard, the morning sun painting long bars of shadow across their faces. The overseer stood nearby, whip coiled at his side, while Donovan's eyes swept the line. "Who prepared the meal?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of final judgment. Ruth, pale and trembling, stepped forward. "We all did, sir," she said. "The kitchen was busy. The Mrs. birthday dinner. No one person alone." Her voice cracked, but the words were steady enough to form a shield. But Donovan was not satisfied. "Too neat," he muttered. He turned to Samuel, whose silence felt like thunder. "And you?" Samuel's jaw worked, but he said nothing. Dr. Webb broke the tension with a small cough. He had been examining the kitchen and now returned, holding up a small vial, half hidden in his gloved hand. "Rat poison," he said simply. purchased 6 months ago, according to the receipts. His eyes narrowed at the enslaved faces before him. Yet the amount here does not match what should remain. The overseer's whip twitched in his grip. Rosa swallowed hard, her mouth dry as the dust beneath her feet. What choice did they have but silence? By 8 a.m., the sheriff ordered a search. Boots tramped through cabins, tossing thin blankets and prying into clay jars. They found nothing but mended clothes, worn shoes, and scraps of food. Nothing to link Rosa to the poison. Nothing to betray the secret school she and Ruth had kept alive by candlelight, its ashes now scattered in the garden soil. Still, suspicion spread like wildfire. At the neighboring Turner plantation, whispers had already reached the household. White families locked doors, dismissed cooks, and forced enslaved women to taste each dish before serving. Fear became ritual. Hunger seemed safer than trust, and in Adams County, fear was a contagion deadlier than arsenic. Back at the Whitmore estate, Rosa kept her eyes low as Donovan studied her. His gaze lingered too long, as if he could see beneath her skin to the secret pulsing in her chest. The sheriff's fingers tightened around a telegram in his pocket, news arriving from Georgia that would unravel their carefully spun lies. The moment hadn't come yet, but Rosa could feel it. The air smelled of honeysuckle and death. Donovan stepped closer. Someone here knows the truth, and I intend to find it. Would Rosa's silence hold against the weight of the law, or would the first crack in their story bring the noose before sundown? The horses outside stamped their hooves impatiently, as though waiting for the chase. By midday, the Mississippi sun burned high, its heat pressing down like a judgment. Flies buzzed over the Whitmore yard, circling the linens that covered bodies awaiting burial. The sweet, sour tang of decay mixed with magnolia blossoms, and in that stifling air, suspicion grew heavier than the heat. Sheriff Donovan paced the veranda, the boards creaking beneath his boots. In his hand, he carried a ledger. The Whitmore accounts, each page smeared with ink and sweat. "This isn't just one meal," he muttered, flipping through records of purchases. Sugar, flour, barrels of salted pork, and their arsenic logged under vermin control. His thumb tapped the entry. 1/2 pound gone missing. Dr. Webb stood nearby, his spectacles catching the sunlight. 1/2 pound is enough to kill a regiment, he said. He adjusted his notes. And if someone was careful, the symptoms might be blamed on summer fever or bad meat. How many deaths have been hidden under those excuses? The words hung heavy. If this wasn't an isolated act, then Rosa's defiance might not be the first or the last. Inside the kitchen, Rosa wiped her hands on her apron, pretending to scrub pots already clean. Every scrape of metal against tin felt like thunder in her ears. She remembered nights bent over smuggled books. Ruth's whisper, "They'll never suspect if you're quiet. Quiet is how we survive." But survival had turned into something sharper, a blade she could not put down. By 2 o'clock, Donovan called the household staff back into the yard. "This isn't the first," he declared, his voice sharp as the crack of a pistol. 2 sons in Georgia last year, dead after whiskey. A matriarch in Alabama, summer fever they called it. I see the pattern now. Same girl, passed from house to house, same cook. His eyes swept the line and landed on Rosa. Her breath caught. The overseer stepped forward eagerly, whip uncoiling like a serpent. "I knew it," he hissed. "I'll make her talk." But Donovan raised a hand. "Not yet." His gaze narrowed. "Patterns don't lie, but I need more than suspicion. I need proof." The stakes had never been sharper. If Donovan proved his case, Rosa would face more than the noose. Her silence could cost every soul who had ever shielded her. The afternoon wore on. The enslaved children were herded into the shade, where Patterson, the new overseer, crouched low to their level, his voice dripping like honey. Tell me what Rosa said. Tell me who she spoke with. Tiny faces looked back at him, wide-eyed, trembling. But they remembered Rosa's words. If they ask, you say nothing. Silence is armor. One boy, barely 10, swallowed hard and met Patterson's gaze. She told me, poison is sweeter than sugar if you know how to serve it. His words rang in the air, sharp as broken glass. The yard fell still. Patterson's whip snapped once, but Donovan only barked a laugh. Children and their stories, he said. No court would hang a woman on the tail of a boy. Still, the seed had been planted, and Rosa knew it. At dusk, a courier arrived on horseback, dust rising in clouds behind him. He carried a sealed envelope, its wax stamped with the governor's crest. Donovan tore it open beneath the dying Sunday. The letter inside was brief, the words clear. No expense spared. The woman must be taken alive. Reward doubled to $2,000. The hunt was no longer local. It was national. As night fell, Rosa sat alone in the cabin, her hand brushing the vial still hidden in her bodice. The glass was cool against her skin, her one final escape if capture came. Outside, hounds barked in the distance, their voices carried by the heavy night air. Freedom always sounded like footsteps in the dark, and those footsteps were coming closer. Would she vanish into the network waiting upriver, or would Donovan's suspicion tighten into chains before she could take her next breath? The lantern flame flickered once, then died, leaving only shadows. The night smelled of wet earth and wood smoke. Insects droned in the thickets, and somewhere down by the river a hound bayed, its cry carrying across the flat delta land. Rosa crouched in the shadows behind the smokehouse, her breath shallow, her bundle clutched tight against her chest. Inside that bundle lay 2 dresses, a strip of dried meat, and a folded scrap of paper with a name she had memorized, Cora, Tennessee Line. The stakes pressed hard. If she stayed, suspicion would become proof. If she ran, the hunt would begin. And yet, staying meant the whip. Running meant the dogs. Survival balanced on a knife's edge. Just after midnight, Ruth slipped into the yard. Her lantern swung low, wrapped in cloth, to dim the flame. "It's time," she whispered. Her eyes darted toward the big house, where Sheriff Donovan's silhouette moved past an upstairs window. They'll search again at dawn. Rosa hesitated, her hand brushing the glass vial hidden at her breast. One swallow, and no man could drag her back. But Ruth's grip was steady. "You taught us words have power. Use them now. Not the poison." The women moved silent as shadows, slipping through the back fields where the cotton stalks whispered like ghosts. At the tree line, Samuel waited with a mule. He pressed Rosa's hand once, his eyes burning with something unsaid, then stepped back. "North," he muttered. "Keep the river on your left. Trust only those who give the password." By 3 a.m., Rosa was already 5 miles away, her skirts damp with dew, her shoes caked in mud. Each step felt stolen. Each owl call made her flinch. The first safe house stood near Natchez, a cabin owned by a free black carpenter named Josiah. The walls smelled of pine pitch and sweat, the floor rough beneath Rosa's bare feet. Josiah said little, only handed her bread and pointed to a trapdoor beneath a rug. "They'll search here by sunrise," he warned. "Better you're beneath the floorboards." Hours later, boots thundered across the porch. Through the cracks, Rosa saw them 2 men with dogs, rifles slung at their shoulders. One spat tobacco juice and grumbled, "Governor's put 2,000 on her head. That's more than I'll see in 10 years. The other laughed. For a slip of a girl with poison hands, imagine the gall. The boards above her groaned as they stomped through. Rosa's heart hammered so hard she thought it might give her away. But Josiah's voice held firm. Ain't seen no runaway. You can turn the place inside out, you won't find a thing. And they didn't. By dawn, the riders were gone. What would you do if silence meant saving a life, but discovery meant a noose for you and yours? The path stretched on, station by station, each stop riskier than the last. In Baton Rouge, a minister's wife slipped Rosa a shawl and whispered a hymn to cover the sound of her trembling. In Memphis, a shopkeeper smuggled her through town inside a barrel of dried beans. Each stranger risked everything for a woman they barely knew, bound together by the simple belief that freedom was worth blood. Yet the net tightened. Back in Mississippi, Donovan spread maps across his desk, marking the places Rosa had lived, the families she had served, the bodies she had left behind. Doctor Webb leaned over the maps, his finger tracing the line north. "She's not random," Webb said quietly. "She's moving with purpose." He pulled out an old bill of sale, the ink water-stained but legible. Clara 19, 2 daughters, ages 3 and 5, sold to separate families. Webb's eyes narrowed. She's following the trail of her children. The revelation struck Donovan like thunder. If Rosa was hunting not just vengeance but blood, then her journey would not end until she found them, or until the hangman found her. And the hangman was already sharpening his rope. In a boarding house in Memphis, Rosa changed her name again. Sarah Coleman, this time. She took work scrubbing floors, her hands raw from lye. Each night, she whispered her daughters' names: Patience, Grace, as if the syllables themselves might guide her north. But the chase was relentless. Dogs barked on the wind. And one wrong word, one careless stroke of a pen, could betray her to the men who hunted not just Rosa of Mississippi, but Adonai, the mother still chasing ghosts of children long torn from her arms. The Mississippi was swollen, fat with spring rain, its muddy current swallowing whole trees as they tumbled downstream. To Rosa, it looked less like a river than a living beast, hungry, restless, always moving. She stood on its banks near Memphis, the night pressing close around her, and knew this crossing was the next gauntlet. The ferryman was a wiry man with a scar across his jaw. "I don't run fugitives," he muttered when she approached. His eyes darted to the shadows. Too costly. Rosa drew out a silver brooch, the last trinket she had carried from Clara's chest of belongings. It gleamed faintly in the lantern light. "For one ride," she whispered. The man stared, then pocketed it with a grunt. "Get in. Keep your head low." Halfway across, the sound carried hooves on the river road, dogs baying. A lantern flared on the bank, then another. Rosa crouched deeper in the boat, heart thundering. The ferryman cursed. "They'll see us." The riders shouted, their torches painting the black water with streaks of fire. Then came the order: shoot the boat. The first musket ball split the air with a crack. The ferryman bellowed, rowing hard. Rosa clutched the edge, teeth clenched. A second shot tore through the wood inches from her knee, water spurting through the hole. "Bail!" the ferryman screamed, thrusting a tin cup at her. Rosa scooped desperately, every splash another second stolen. By some mercy or mistake, the riders did not follow into the water. They cursed from the shore as the little boat limped into the trees on the opposite bank, dripping and trembling. Rosa staggered into the undergrowth. Behind her, the ferryman shoved off again without a word, disappearing back into the dark river. Alone now, she pressed northward. For weeks, she traveled by night, skirting towns, slipping through fields. Once, she slept in a church loft, hidden by a preacher who claimed even the sheriff couldn't climb ladders for fear of heights. Another time, she hid beneath a pile of hay as patrollers poked with pitchforks, the steel grazing her shoulder, but never finding flesh. Still, Donovan's hunt grew sharper. A handbill appeared in every town along the Tennessee line. Wanted. Adonai, alias Rosa, alias Sarah, female of small stature, dark skin, scar on left wrist. Last seen traveling northward. Suspected poisoner and murderess. Reward: 3, 0 alive, 1, 500 dead. The sum was staggering, enough to tempt friend and foe alike. Even the stations of the Underground Railroad grew hesitant, their doors cracking less willingly, their candles burning out faster. Trust frayed like old rope. One night in Kentucky, Rosa stumbled into a tavern yard, her strength near gone. A stable boy with freckles eyed her bundle and the shawl over her head. "You the one on the paper?" he asked in a drawl too casual to be safe. Her hand went instinctively to the vial. A single swallow, no chains, no hounds, no noose. Just silence. But before she could draw it, a woman's voice cut through. "She's with me." The speaker was tall, wrapped in a dark cloak. She lifted the boy by his collar, eyes like flint. "Best you forget you saw anything, or you'll be in the ground before morning." The boy fled, pale as linen. The woman turned to Rosa and pulled back her hood. Streaks of silver ran through her hair, but her voice was steady. "Name's Cora. I've been waiting for you." The name hit Rosa like a bell ringing in the night. The scrap of paper, the name Clara, had once pressed into her hand. Cora, Tennessee line. Now she stood before her, flesh and blood. An old conductor whose reputation stretched farther than the river itself. Cora touched Rosa's face, studying the lines of exhaustion, the fierce light that still burned beneath. "Your fight ain't done," she said softly. "And if it's vengeance you chase, you'll need more than poison. You'll need an army." For the first time, Rosa realized her war might be larger than just her own. And the river, with all its blood and secrets, had carried her straight into its heart. The courthouse in Jackson was a looming box of red brick, its bell tolling each dawn to announce the start of trials. Inside, the air was thick with pipe smoke and sweat, the oak benches crowded with townsfolk eager for spectacle. By the summer of 1843, Rosa's name had reached this chamber not by her capture, but through whispers that had swollen into a storm. Donovan himself stood before the judge, demanding restitution. "My household has been ruined," he barked, slamming his fist on the rail. "My wife, my son, my very livelihood poisoned by a creature I took in and raised. She is a serpent in human skin, and the law must account for her crimes." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. A woman fainted at the word poison. A man spat into the sawdust aisle. The judge banged his gavel. "Enough. The matter is one of property, not poetry. Property." That was all Rosa was. In their eyes, a ledger entry gone rogue. Yet outside, in the shadows of the square, her allies gathered. Cora had threaded the network tighter, passing coded messages sewn into quilts and scratched into barn doors. Farmers sympathetic to the railroad hitched wagons in readiness. Preachers spoke sermons about Pharaoh and plague, dropping Rosa's story into scripture. Still, the tide of fear was strong. A witness was called. A servant girl from the Donovan estate. She trembled as she recounted the night of the stew, the sudden deaths, the suspicion that followed. "I saw Rosa at the pot," she whispered, her hands twisting the hem of her dress. "I don't know what she dropped in, but after that, nothing was the same." The courtroom roared. Some shouted for her hanging, others for mercy. The girl's eyes darted to the gallery, where Donovan glared like a coiled snake. "What would you do? Would you lie to save your skin, or tell the truth and risk the whip?" Rosa, though far from the courthouse, felt the echo of that question gnawing at her. Every ally risked becoming a Judas. Every silence, every stutter could be bought for a price. By dusk, the session adjourned in chaos. Outside, a mob formed, torches bobbing like stars gone mad. "Burn her out," they cried. even though Rosa was nowhere near. Their rage was less about justice than fear. Fear that a young woman had struck at the heart of their dominion and lived to vanish. That night, flames licked the side of the courthouse. Whether by accident or by hand, no one knew. The bell cracked, falling silent as timbers groaned. Ash settled on the square like gray snow. From the far woods, Rosa watched the glow on the horizon. Cora stood beside her, arms crossed. "This is what happens," Cora murmured, "when one spark falls in dry grass. They think they can bury your name. But names like yours only spread." Rosa clenched her fists, feeling the weight of both victory and peril. She was no longer merely a fugitive. She had become a story, a symbol, and in the South of 1843, stories could be more dangerous than bullets. But symbols alone could not shield her from Donovan's vengeance. His hunt was not finished, only sharpened, and Rosa's path was about to run headlong into the one place she swore never to return. Back to Mississippi. Mississippi's summer hung heavy, the air thick with honeysuckle and the sour tang of sweat. Rosa returned not by choice, but by necessity. Cora's network had carried her farther north than she had ever dreamed. Yet the further she went, the louder the whispers became. Donovan's bounty was too high, his influence too deep. In Ohio, a conductor's safe house had been raided. In Indiana, a farmer's boy nearly turned her in for the promise of $3,000. North no longer meant safety, it meant exposure. So Rosa circled back, ghosting through pine woods and abandoned river cabins, until she reached the same earth she had fled. Mississippi was both her graveyard and her proving ground. At dawn one August morning, she crouched near the Donovan estate's outer field. The place looked smaller now, weaker. Weeds curled around fence posts, shutters sagged, and smoke no longer rose from the kitchen chimney where she had once stirred stew under watchful eyes. But inside, Donovan still ruled, bitter and scarred, a man chasing shadows with dogs that barely trusted his hand. Rosa waited until midnight. The crickets sang, the cicadas whined, and the moon cast long silver blades across the yard. She slipped into the garden, her body moving like water through rows of corn. In her hand was the last vial, not cyanide this time, but laudanum, quiet, slow, heavy as chains. Yet something stopped her. From the window came a sound she had not expected, coughing, ragged and wet. Donovan was no longer the iron-willed master, but a ruin, body devoured by sickness. His empire had collapsed without her chains to hold it upright. She stood beneath the window, vial in hand, watching his shadow bend double on the wall. And in that moment, Rosa faced the question that had haunted her across rivers and towns, across courtrooms and burning squares. Was her vengeance in his death or in her survival? The choice was hers alone. The next morning, Donovan's neighbors found his bed empty, his house abandoned. Some claimed Rosa had finally struck, that she left his body in the river mud where hounds could not track it. Others swore she had spared him, disappearing into the swamps while sickness carried him to the grave. And some said she lived unmarried under another name, children at her table, never speaking of Mississippi again. To this day, in pockets of the Delta, old folks still whisper, "If you stir a pot too slow, Rosa's hand will guide yours." The girl who poisoned her master became the woman who refused to be mastered. We're only scratching the surface. The next case is even darker. Subscribe before it drops.